Welcome to Latin America in 15 minutes. My name is Dr. Kim Richardson, and today we're going to quickly discuss La Reforma in Mexico. This lecture is important because what we're trying to do is discuss the liberals as they come to power in the 1860s or so. Keep in mind that last time we discussed about how after the Mexican-American War, President Santa Anna came back to power in Mexico. War is expensive and costly. He needed money. And the United States wanted to build a railroad all the way from Houston through El Paso, through what would then be Tucson, up to Los Angeles. It's much easier to build it through this territory because it's flatter desert and not a whole lot of people live there. So General Santa Anna agrees to sell it to the United States. That Gadsden purchase, therefore the last contiguous territorial acquisition in the United States, is the last straw because many of the people that he had ousted from power, because of course he's a dictator, decided to come back across the border into Mexico. That had been ousted into the United States, and they led a revolution of Ayutla. This revolution, what it is going to do is say, listen, the conservatives have been in power under the dictatorship of General Santa Anna. Ever since the 1830s, it's time to change things. If you remember our previous discussion, we said something like this. Remember that this is very loose if we're talking about all of Latin America, because there's always exceptions to every rule. But in the 1820s, they get independence, and around the 1830s, up until the 1830s, the liberals are in charge. For example, in 1833, that's when the conservatives come to power in Mexico. It's not the same everywhere exactly. In the end of 1830s, 1840s, the conservatives therefore come to power, and they last until the 1860s, the end of the 1850s in the case of Mexico, and around the 1860s till the 1900 or so, the liberals once again come to power. So if you keep that in mind, then this will make more sense, right? The whole fight that we saw so far, liberals versus conservatives, and you see a continuation of this right here. Okay, so one of the leaders, the one that we want to talk about here, of the revolution of Ayutla is going to be Benito Juárez. He and the other leaders are now liberal in Mexico, and they say it's time to establish liberal reforms. It's interesting, all of Latin America in the 1860s seemed to be establishing liberal reforms. And Mexico is a great example. Some of these liberal reforms that they established with the revolution of Ayutla are going to be to abolish the fueros. That's the ley Juárez. The fueros, remember, there are corporate privileges that had come from since the Middle Ages and beyond, and before. And these are the fact that if you belong to a certain corporation, like the church or the military, then you get certain special privileges. Like you get to be tried in courts of your own peers, not to pay certain taxes, be able to wear certain clothes or armaments or whatever, certain things. Well, Juárez, as a liberal, wants to have equal rights for all. If one can do it, all can do it. If one commits a crime, he does the same time as anybody else. The second law is the ley Lerdo, established by Lerdo. It ended corporate ownerships, right? So that means that if one corporation, like the church, is using land that is not being effectively used, and effectively used is going to be according to the government in charge, then it can be taken away and sold to to be used by private ownership. Even ejidos, that's the bad part. There's a lot of people at this time that lived in villages. The villages owned land communally with other villagers. So therefore these were deemed ineffectively used by the government, and they too were taken and sold off to whoever could pay for them. So the ley Lerdo, ley Juárez, ley Lerdo, and the third one, the ley Iglesias, set maximum cost for church sacraments. Now that's not such a big deal in and of itself. See, if you can't afford certain sacraments, like last rites, baptism, marriage, well now, according to the ley Iglesias, the church still has to perform those ordinances for you. Now, so what? Well, the issue is now these three laws are subsuming the authority of the church underneath that of the state. It's anti-clerical. And you can imagine that a lot of people, the conservatives, are going to be very upset at the liberals for passing these anti-clerical laws. Again, if you take all of Latin America, they begin to pass anti-clerical liberal reform measures at the same time. It's not just Mexico. In this case, like so many other places, it's going to be embedded into a new constitution, the liberal constitution of 1857. This is going to lead to the conservatives saying, oh my goodness, enough is enough. And they rose up in rebellion under the slogan, religion and fueros. La religión y fueros. They're upset at the liberal measures, and so they fight against them. Of course, the liberals are going to have to fight back against the conservatives, which leads to a civil war, 1858 to 1861. Not as long as the civil war that's about to take place in the United States, but still a long, very bloody civil war. And in the end of this civil war, the conservatives lost, and the liberals won. Many conservatives are poor losers. So they go to France, and they say, Napoleon III, Emperor of France, we are so upset at these godless liberals that have defeated us in this war. You've got to do something about this. Well, why should I do something about this? Well, one reason is that the new president is going to be Benito Juárez. Benito Juárez says we cannot possibly pay back our debts right now. We are so far in debt we can't even survive. So he placed a moratorium on all Mexican debts. Now, that means that the three major countries that had loaned money to Mexico, Spain, England, and France, see that they're not going to be paid back at least for a little while. So they decide they better hold a convention and decide what they're going to do about it. Well, they're going to have to force Mexico to pay. In the end, it's going to be mostly the French that are going to come to Veracruz in Mexico, and they're the ones that are going to stay. The other two are going to say, it's not worth it. So economic problems plus Napoleon III's desire for an empire is going to lead to the Second Empire of Mexico. It is supposedly at this time that the term Latin America comes about by the French, because the French say Latin, like the French, which is a derivative of Latin, right? It's one of those Romance languages. We deserve to have control of Latin America as much as anybody else. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's something to think about. The French then, with the support of the conservatives, decide to attack Mexico. They attack in 1862, and they are repelled on the 5th of May, 1862, by a group of Mexican soldiers, including, among other people, the famous Porfirio Diaz, who will later become dictator of Mexico. This is really the only major battle at this time that the Mexicans won, and it's going to be celebrated ever since. The 5th of May, we celebrate Cinco de Mayo, fireworks, all sorts of great things. It is not a celebration of the independence, but of this Battle of Pueblo. Therefore, Napoleon III institutes on the throne of Mexico, of the Empire of Mexico, the Second Empire again, Emperor Maximilian, heir to the throne of Austria, the Empire of Austria, and his wife Charlotte, who now takes the name Carlota, who sounds more Mexican, Empress Carlota. They rule, and the conservatives liked them and supported them because they were seen to be conservatives themselves. After all, their monarch, well, he wasn't a monarch, but a nobility in Europe, so why wouldn't he be a conservative once he come to the Americas? But he was not that conservative. He was more liberal than the conservatives realized he was. He was trying to placate both sides. But there's only so much he can placate, and Benito Juárez flees to the north, and he's going to fight back. The place in which the emperor stayed is going to be the Chapultapec Castle. It's still an awesome place to go visit. Remember Los Niños Héroes that we talked at the end of the Mexican-American War? That's where they're staying. This makes their palace right here. Anyway, Benito Juárez flees to the north. Right now it's called Ciudad Juárez. It was called at the time El Paso del Norte, but now it is named after him. And from there, he fights back against Maximilian. It's a super-duper bloody civil war. It's not really a civil war. War against the French invasion, right? At this point. Now, the United States has issued the Monroe Doctrine saying that they're opposed to any interference in Western Hemispheric affairs by Europeans. So Benito Juárez goes to Abraham Lincoln and says, remember this? And Abraham Lincoln says, absolutely, and I'm going to help you as soon as I can, but I'm in the middle of a terrible civil war myself. So as soon as the civil war ends, I will help you, I promise. Well, the Civil War ends, and even though he's not really able to help himself, if you know American history, he gets shot in the head. But a whole bunch of guns and ammunition and supplies, war material, get sent to Benito Juárez. After all, they don't need it in the Civil War anymore because the Civil War after Appomattox Courthouse is ended in North America. So with this, all of a sudden, Benito Juárez has the upper hand, and he's able to defeat Emperor Maximilian. Emperor Maximilian had issued kill on sight order for all of the rebels. You capture them, you kill them, right? So in response to this, Benito Juárez, much to the chagrin of much of the rest of the world, executed Emperor Maximilian, as you can see here, and his wife went back to Europe to live with her brother. So if we got this right here, I emphasize in this 15 minutes that what the problem is here is that we have the conservatives in power. Yet the conservatives, especially under caudillos, are supporting the elites. The masses are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. And at the same time, you have a group of people, liberals, that the liberals wanted liberty, justice, and equality for all. So they want to represent the masses more. And even though once they get into power, they don't seem to represent the liberals, the masses, theoretically, that is what they're for. So issues like Ley Juárez, Ley Lerdo, Ley Iglesias, these are all reform measures. You take this idea of the reform of Mexico, and I use this in particular, and you can say, well, what about the rest of Latin America? Is the same thing occurring at the same time? Absolutely. The 1960s is a period of liberals taking power and beginning reform movements. But then it's saying that the liberals did not seem as much of liberals as they thought, right? And so that's going to lead to a whole new thing, especially beginning the 1890s when you have a period of economic crisis. It's the worst economic crisis before 1930. And then as the 20th century dawns, it's going to say, well, we better change things up a little bit because conservatives don't work, liberals don't work. All right, that is the quickest lecture of all, Modern Latin America in 15 minutes. I'm Dr. Kim Richardson. Stay tuned for the next lecture.